this was something that was brought to my attention. Rabbi Shmuel, who writes a weekly, I guess, one of those Torah weeklies, one of the better ones, because normally these glossy so-called Torah weeklies and Olam Katan and the rest of them that litter synagogues around the country on Shabbos are mostly advertisements for vacations and for higher education. Thank God. Mikam Klei Yisrael. We want to study and then we want to go take a vacation. So that's mostly what it's for. But you're not supposed to really be reading these things. It's just advertisements and news disguised as Torah, so it suddenly becomes permissible on Shabbos. For example, the sages said you shouldn't be reading Divrei Malachim, right? Shouldn't be reading the news about what wars are going on in politics on Shabbos. It's a good time to be away from those things. It used to be in America, we got even kosher newspapers. Why is it the newspaper industry is still flourishing in America among the Jews? Because Jews read their newspapers, they got Ted Ne'eman's in the Jewish press. When? On Shabbos. So if Jews would please stop doing that, that's certainly not what the sages intended. Better to just study. We have a whole day Spanish that you have to be studying here. Okay. I brought this up because he is analyzing the Ramban's opinion with regards to the uniqueness of King David. And for me, this actually it brings to light, I think, a good answer to the question that we had regarding King David being disqualified from ultimately building the temple. We said that David said about himself that God had told him that he had spilled too much blood. It says that twice in Divrei Yamin. We found that we never saw that it says Vayomer Hashem el David, or the Navi came and said to David, here's why God is preventing you from building the temple. So the question was, maybe that was King David's own assessment of the situation. Or perhaps maybe, no, that it's just he's mentioning in passing something that is obviously true. But the question then is, assuming that King David was not allowed to build the temple because he had spilled much blood, why is it other great figures in Jewish history who had also spilled much blood, had also conducted many wars, did have the zechut to actually rebuild the temple or set the temple in order? Examples consist of Joshua and Moses. Moses fought many wars for Am Yisrael, was leader in many wars. He also is famous for being the leader of the Jewish people when they constructed the tabernacle. And Joshua, the conqueror of the land of Israel, also set up the first semi-permanent temple at Shiloh. That was something he did 14 years after, well, actually, technically, if you read the Psukim, 7 years. Okay, the Mishnah says 14 years, and the Tosefta also has that way. That's the way it's said at Rolam. But you can read the pasuk and say it was 7 years after he got into the land. But the point was, it was after all the wars that Joshua actually set up a temple, and they built, as we pointed out, we're going to see soon, they actually built a permanent structure to house the semi-permanent Mishkan, as it was, such that when you would be standing, if you would go into the temple, which you're not supposed to, you'd stand in this stone structure, Machon Shilo. The inside, you would see the golden boards that Moses had made, or had commissioned, at least. Who else did this? Yudah Maccabee was a great Jewish warrior. He and his brothers achieved Jewish independence and retook the temple in Jerusalem and rededicated the temple. The temple was bereft of anything. It was a hollow structure. They even had to build a new Mizbeach and a new Kalim from scratch. And they spilled much enemy blood, yet they still had this rights to reestablish the temple as it was supposed to be. So how can you say that King David spilled much blood, and that's what somehow disqualified him from building the temple? So here, Rav Eliyahu goes into the Ramban's opinion about how Am Yisrael at the time of King David was not ready to build a temple. Or as he summarizes over here, David Rotzeh v'lo yachol. King David wanted to build a temple, he could not. Am Yachol v'lo Rotzeh. The people had the capacity to build a temple, but they did not want to. King David had to lead this revolution. And he also brings this classic teaching over here from the Midrash Shocher Tov, that all those thousands who fell in the Davidic wars during King David's time, there were many wars. And yes, there were many great victories. And it achieved a lasting Jewish peace for quite a while. It was King David's time, another generation until King Solomon's time. We don't hear of Jewish wars. So he says they only fell in battle because they did not demand the building of the temple. That wasn't on the agenda for them. To make a long story short, my theory is that when it says that King David spilled much blood, and that's why he was disqualified from building the temple, it is not referring to the blood of the enemy. Not only is that something that would not distinguish him from other great Jewish leaders who also killed many of the enemy, it would be that King David actually did a mitzvah. Destroying the enemy is a commandment. It says, what's the goal? Establish a king, right? Set up a king, destroy Amalek, and then build the temple. And you tell the king, sorry, you killed too many Amalekites. You wiped out Amalek. Too much blood was spilled. Now you can't build the temple? Doesn't seem to make sense. If you'd have a proper king, a messianic figure, I would imagine, I would hope, I pray, would do such a thing. We'd have a proper king, and he would wipe out all of the Amalekites speeding our days, and then build the temple. And I wouldn't want him to be disqualified thereof because he destroyed Amalek from doing so. So it's a little bit tricky. No, it says King David was saying about himself that God had told him he had spilled too much blood. It means he had been the instrument of too much Jewish blood being spilt. That's what the Ramban is getting at here. That's where Mordechai is getting here. The same we haven't said before. It's alluded to. It's that King David still went to war with his Jewish soldiers, and he himself acknowledged in his, perhaps the one thing for which the Navi holds him liable is that he said basically, yeah, we are going to lose a few men. We can't make an omelet without cracking a few eggs. He said that when one of his greatest soldiers fell, among others, in a critical battle. Says, yeah, but that's what happens. There's always a sacrifice. The fact that King David was presiding over so many Jewish deaths in battle that perhaps could have been avoided or could have somehow been ameliorated. Maybe if they had, I don't know, done something else beforehand, that there would have been less Jewish people who fell in battle. He would have merited to build a temple. By the way, I don't think this was held against him. It doesn't mean that, David, it's your fault that Jews fell in battle, and therefore you are disqualified from building the temple. It's that you are the leader over a people who have fallen in battle too much. Not that you yourself, because if King David would be punished or held liable for such a thing, he would not have had the, for lack of a better word, I want to speak English, he wouldn't have had the privilege of setting up so much to build a temple, dedicating so much of the materials, and getting to draw up the blueprints himself, and even having his own heir, his own son, build the temple. No, it was to his credit that he built the temple. Just the people were not ready for such a thing. He had presided over people who had shown that they were not yet ready to build a temple, and that's why they were falling in battle. So I guess this is a moose for Haskell for also today, but I guess I hope that this is, for me, this is the most satisfying answer to the question that we've had now for a few years. What does it mean that King David spilled so much blood and therefore he could not build a temple? It means that he presided over an Am Yisrael that fell too much in battle for whatever reason, and therefore his generation was not yet ready, not yet qualified to enjoy the building of the temple, even if King David himself was, and he had already earned that it would be dedicated to his name. It would have his name on it, basically, and his own son would be building it.